Okay, sure. Well, first of all, I'm not a librarian, so don't call me a librarian, please. No, just kidding. So my responsibility at AADL is for IT and production, which means, all the IT stuff, printers, networking, servers, websites, but also everything that the library produces in terms of events, marketing material, websites, software development, all that kind of stuff. So in my staff, we currently have, 4 degreed librarians. 2 of them have the title of production librarian, which is probably what we're most talking about today as far as what does a librarian do. The big part of a production librarian's job is basically to produce new products. They make new stuff. The production librarians typically work on the desk maybe 4 hours a week, maybe a little bit more if there's a sick call in or lunch or something like that. But I think we're to the point, and this is my opinion, I think we're to the point that to put a degreed librarian on a public service desk is not a good use of taxpayers' funds. Not to say that they can't do an excellent job there. They can. But they can do a much better job and reach a larger number of people with the products that they produce working away from the desk. And then there's the very real fact that, reference is dead. And if any of your professors tell you otherwise, they're wrong. Reference is dead. It's gone. And the types of questions that we get at the desk, other than, where's the bathroom, where's the bathroom, where's the bathroom, which is the number one question that you get. The other types of questions that you get are stuff that generally most web natives can do a pretty good job of answering. And if not, they just need to know how to escalate it to someone behind the scenes who might be able to do a better answer. So part of where I'm coming from is that librarians return the most on their investment when they're making new things as opposed to answering the same questions. So getting that, doing what you can with your staff to try to get them moved around and try to free up those resources, because librarians are extremely good at organizing information and making it accessible. And that's not really the work that happens on the desk, on the public desk. So a lot of it, the standard day in the life now is, first of all, there will be project work. And many of that project work are multi-year projects where, for example, right now we're working on a project to document the history of a very big event in Ann Arbor. Actually, Rob here in the audience is doing a pet project on us with us on that. And there was this rally 40 years ago called the Free John Sinclair Rally, which is a very big event in Ann Arbor history. And nobody is really documenting it other than us as the public library. So we're pulling together some collections out of the Bentley. We're talking to as many of the people that are still alive. So the librarians that are working on this project are primarily doing selection of items to be digitized, production of original content, whether it's text or whether it's audio, going around and interviewing people around the state who were at this event or who were important figures, even to the point where, there's a very famous poster designer who's involved with this whole time. We went to interview him in the hospital because it wasn't certain that he would get out. So we made sure to get out there with a podcasting rig, and we interviewed him in the hospital cafeteria so we could get him to talk about this thing, because no one's ever gotten him to talk about this kind of thing before. We interviewed, this whole situation was about a young man who got sent to jail for, 10 years for selling 2 joints to an undercover cop. One of the people we interviewed was the judge who served on that. So it's not always organizing of information. A lot of the work that the production librarians do is producing new content that wouldn't have been produced otherwise. And also using their sense of what's out there and what is available to make good choices about how to invest our resources. One of the best values that our librarians give to us is when we can say, we got this thing. Is this a good thing or not a good thing? And they take a look at it and they think about everything else that's around and they say, no, this is really special. We need to do something with this. Or, nah, this is not so great. This might be the one precious copy of it, but the information isn't that useful. So that curatorial aspect of selection is a very big part of what they do. Also, the production librarians are a part of our software development team. So right now we're working on getting ready to launch a new product, which is unlimited DRM-free music downloads. That product, the librarian's role on it was to do the mock-ups of how the screens might look, create usability test questions for them, and post them out to the public. And we got 4,000 responses over a couple days from our public trying the usability of that. Now, these aren't HCI people. These are LIS people. But the two skills that they have that are the most valuable are understanding of software development, not in terms of being able to write code, but in terms of being able to know the difference between easy and hard. That's the most magical skill that a geek can have, is to know when someone says, can we do X? And you say, sure, give me 2 minutes, or maybe 6 months. That ability to tell the difference between those two things is a critical skill. And our production librarians, by attending our software development meetings, have been able to get a better handle on what's easy and what's hard. And it mostly comes down to, has anyone done it before? Or does it build upon frameworks that are existing in our software? The other part that goes along with that is having a real strong sense about what public service and public websites really are. In the library world, you'll have a group of web users that is unlike most other websites' set of users. Flickr can do things that a public library would never get away with because we have a much broader range of users. Just as an example, we've heard anecdotally that a large number of our users, and I'm guessing maybe 20-25% of the people who have registered accounts on our website, don't have a registered account anywhere else on the web. That's the one site that they have a username and password with. And when they forget their password, they don't know the conventions of how you get your password back. They put in their email address as their password, or all kinds of stuff like that. So when you're doing usability testing and trying to reach a very wide audience, because especially in a public library, everyone in your service area already paid for your service. They paid up front. And it's up to you to make your services as easy to use and as accessible as possible to reach the widest audience. And that comes down to kind of having an idea about how to reach wider audiences than the traditional audiences of libraries, which is where we spend a lot of our time doing. As an aside, when we do a job interview and I say, why do you want to work at a library? And they say, I love books. I'm about ready to say, thank you, thanks for your time. Nice to meet you. So that's the wrong answer, because for someone to go into libraries because they love books is like wanting to become, a gastroenterologist because you really love diverticulitis. It's such a small part, really. And even though it's a big part of the collections, the fact is that libraries have been coasting on our recreational reader audiences for generations. And those audiences are about to have, or they already do have, better alternatives than the public library. We got a lot of interesting situations right now with ebooks and all that stuff. But the thing that's the most dangerous to libraries' perception of value to their communities is the 99-cent ebook. And that's coming. There's no way that it's not going. All ebooks are going to fall to 99 cents. And when you have the choice of pay $1 and believe you own it, or wait 6 weeks from the library, that's no choice at all. So positioning services that have unique appeal and creating them and finding audiences for them beyond people who like to read for fun, which, let's face it, is a minority of Americans. Finding ways to reach a higher percentage of the population in your service area is really the work of librarians. And that comes into developing products that are more like consumer products and less like educational tools. Like I said, a big example of it is right now we're about to launch this MP3 product. And it's got a lot of different types of music from all over the place. But we needed to approach it from a place where we knew it was going to be a sustainable service at the library, which means you can't pay every time it gets used, because libraries can't be in a position of being victims of their own success. If something takes off, you don't want that to kill your budget because it took off. You want to be able to plan for your expenditures. So the work of, the day in the life of the librarians at AADL, of course there's the librarians who are on the desk and doing all that work, and I think Shalani will talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But the production librarians and the sort of tech work that goes on behind the scenes is really the future of the profession, because it's not going to continue to make economic sense for such highly educated people to be saying where the bathroom is 6 times an hour. So there's a lot of potential, and the abilities of a librarian to be able to determine what content is most useful to their audience, not what content they wish was most useful to their audience, but what content they actually know is most useful to their audience, is a critical skill. And knowing the ways that the other products in that space, whether it's Flickr or YouTube or whatever, the ways that they are successful in reaching their audiences, the ways that libraries can follow that is critical. So, the day in the life of a librarian is a lot more about this and a lot less about waiting behind the desk for someone to ask a question. But I think that's about it. It's my 10 minutes. I think we're going to do questions at the end. Questions at the end. So, thank you.
All right, I guess I'll go next. As you've heard, I work at the same library as Eli. My title is the Manager of Youth and Adult Services and Collections Department. That's a big title. There are a lot of things that go on in our department. One thing that's true about our library is that we have a lot of collaboration across departments. For example, 2 of the librarians who work in my department, they're adult librarians. That's traditionally what they have done. They used to spend many, 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 many hours on the reference desk. They work half their time in Eli's department, creating those products and working on those things that he was just talking about. First, I'll go through a little bit of what I'm responsible for and what I do, so you can get a bigger picture of what it is that our department does. This department is basically responsible for the non-circ frontline services that you see at the library. So the information desk folks, those are all folks in YASC, as we call it, or YASC department. Now, if you walk into the library at any given time, you may be talking to a librarian, you may not. We have I don't even know off the top of my head how many, but we have about 26 people who are working at all the different desks who are not librarians at all. And that's before you count the public library associates, who are your colleagues, often here, who are learning about the library so that they can inform their future choices. Selection of material, deselection of material, all that comes through the department. Cataloging, ordering, all of those things that go on in front, the things that come to your hands and the processes they go through, many of them, before they get to you, that's all happening in this department. So in terms of my typical day, I spend a lot of it talking. When you have that many people in one department doing so many different things, you really have to spend a lot of time talking to folks about how their different pieces fit together, talking to folks about where it is that we're trying to go, and doing that sort of thing. For example, this week I think I spent about 8 hours in formal meetings and several more hours in informal meetings with people, many, many hours answering the many emails that happen that talk about, okay, now when Eli said that, what was he talking about? And when this supervisor said that, does that apply to me too? That sort of thing, just trying to make sure that things are happening on the floor level. And then we're in budgeting time. So that's pretty critical, particularly now. As I'm sure in school, all you ever hear is like budgets. They're going down, they're going down, they're going down, they're going down. That's what I hear that you guys are hearing, and we're dealing with that too. The librarians in the department have all sorts of different functions. There's not one job description that fits every single librarian in the department. A lot of it has to do with what they bring to the table. When we're looking to hire people, that's what we're looking at. We're like, what do you bring to the table that somebody else doesn't bring to the table? What are you going to think about and bring to our institution that's going to help our public? So like Eli said, when you're like, I love the books, and that's what I love. What does that bring to the table, A, that we don't have, because we've got those people. and how do you think about the future in that? I think that, if you ask us where our library is going to be in the future, which is one of the questions that was posed to us before we came in here, it's like, well, I don't know. What are libraries going to do now to figure that out? As Eli was talking about in terms of, we're prepaid service, and there's gonna be a point where people are like, are you worth the money that I'm spending? And when that moment comes, you don't get the chance to make a case. It's not like, well, these are the reasons why. We're making the case right now. And if we don't develop products, if we don't develop services that speak to folks, when they finally get around to asking themselves that question, we're done. So what is it that we're going to do now to prevent finding ourselves, as you like to say, holding the buggy whip? Let's see. One of the key things that I think that is important for librarians to have is flexibility. What is going on today is not necessarily what's going to be going on in 6 months, 10 months, a year. And if you don't have the flexibility to take in that new information, adjust where you're coming from, that's going to be a problem. The way that we operate right now is totally different than it was a year ago in some capacities. Certainly is different than 3 years ago, certainly is different than 8 years ago. And without having the flexibility to accommodate that creates huge problems for us. And you see it in a lot of the discussions. Like, you see people thinking about the future facing the past. Like, what are we going to do about this problem? Well, this is what we used to do. And it's kind of like, well, that's what you used to do because that's not working anymore. And one thing that I see in a lot of the discussions that we have in our profession is like, okay, I'm going to face backward and talk about the future. And I think that that's one thing that we really have to get out of that. Along with that, I don't think that we have, I think that with things changing as quickly as they have been, that libraries don't have the time to come around to the changes that we've benefited from, I guess, if you want to call it that, in the past. Like, things are happening rapidly. Things are happening in terms of the way that people are coming to information, coming to what it is they want to do with their time very quickly. We don't have time to wait and see what's going to happen and try to react to that. It doesn't work that way. I think that what we need to concentrate on is making informed predictions about what people are going to do with their time. I also think that in terms of when we compare ourselves to other institutions, other industries, which we should be doing, that we need to think more broadly than we do. Like, the main thing you hear when you talk to a bunch of librarians when they're making a comparison is the bookstore. Well, we see how that's going. We have to think about the other competitors for people's time. That's where I see us as really competing. How much extra time do you guys have? Are you sloppy with your time? I don't think so. Nobody's sloppy with their time these days anymore. And that's what we're competing for with folks. And I think that when we start to think about that, are we a time asset? Are we a time liability in terms of the way that people see using us? That's when we start to think about the ways that we can fit into people's lives. I also think in terms of what to do for your future, find people who are doing things that find people aren't facing the past and follow them. Follow their website, follow their tweets, follow what it is that they're doing. Think about what they're doing. Think about the skills that you have that fit into that. Think about people who don't use the library. You need to talk to them as well. Like, the majority of people aren't hanging around in the public library. When's the last time, aside from your colleagues here, you ran into people that you know in your civilian life hanging out in the library? That just, unless you guys have different friends than I do, that just doesn't happen. So what is it that they're doing what is it that they're doing? What is it that they want? What is it that they want to see? What is it that adds value to library service, or would if they were using it? Be critical. I mean, you're going to have opportunities to meet people who are currently librarians. Think about what it is that they're saying. Don't just let them data dump on you and absorb it all, because you will learn either an easy way or a hard way that's not going to be as helpful as you might think. Think about what it is that they're telling you. Think about the questions that they're having. Is it a symptom of when they started library school? Is it, like, I focus on this area and this is all I can see, or is it something bigger? Is it something that you can see mattering along the horizon? Think about whether you're addressing symptoms or larger problems. That's one thing I certainly see going on a lot in the different discussions that I see on listservs, this, that, and other. And be willing to change your mind. I think that that's huge. Like I said before, what's true today isn't necessarily going to be true even in 6 months or a year. And if you're able to change your mind and take the new information and adjust from that, I think you're going to put yourself in a good position. That's what I've got.
So I also worked at the Ann Arbor District Library for a little while, but that's not what I'm going to talk to you about. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Canton Public Library is about 20-25 minutes east of here. We're on the very western edge of Wayne County, so we're part of the county that includes Detroit. And yet, because of our proximity to Washtenaw County, we have a lot of, it's a bedroom community, and we have a lot of people that live in Canton and commute other places. They work here at the university or other companies in Ann Arbor. They work in Detroit for Quicken or one of the large companies that are moving down there, or at one of the suburbs that surround us. We have a very large contingent of Ford Motor Company workers. Some of them are factory workers, but we have a lot of engineers. I grew up in Canton, which I think is one of the reasons they hired me, because I have direct experience with Canton growing from a rural farming community to the home of IKEA. which is what it is today. That's what I'm like, at Canton, they're like, what? I'm like, IKEA? And they're like, yeah, IKEA. So I came in 3 years ago, in 2008, replaced a long-time beloved library director who still lives in my community. And the recession was pegged as starting in December of 2007. I started in January of 2008. And pretty much everything that I have done over the last 3 years has been about cutting the budget. And my focus has been on thinking about the possibilities with the money that we still have, rather than mourning the loss of the money we no longer have. And I think that if I were to start at the end of the questions that they asked us to answer, that would be the thing that I would tell you as far as what I'm looking for when I'm hiring people. I don't get to hire very many people. There's a myth that the library director runs everything. Stuff kind of runs itself if you have the right people in place. I find out about things normally when they go wrong, but sometimes when things are going well. But the thing that we try to look for are people who have a strong sense of possibilities. Like, what is possible here? Not what can I not do? What are you not going to allow me to do? And that's been a big shift as far as the working environment at the library, to get people to think about the possibilities and think about, where can we go from here, not like you guys are both saying, about looking in the past and mourning the loss. A typical day for me, it's hilarious. I do a lot of talking. I do a lot of wandering around. Last week I spent my morning at the district court to testify against a kid who stole books from my library. That always surprises people. One, that we have theft, and then two, that someone tried to steal books, graphic novels. Not bad. I spend a lot of time in meetings, obviously. I spend a lot of time working outside of my library, meeting with our Downtown Development Authority and the director of the Downtown Development Authority, our Parks and Rec, which we call Leisure Services. We do a lot of partnering with them. When the economy took a downturn, I sat down with the Leisure Services director and we talked about doing things that would complement each other rather than competing with each other. So Leisure Services no longer does youth enrichment storytime programs. We do those. And if they need someone to come and do it, they'll ask us and we will go and do it. We no longer try to do outdoor crafty kinds of activities because they run the park system and they do those already. They let us borrow their climbing wall for some of our summer reading events. We partner more with each other than we used to. I meet with our economic development director. When I got to Canton and said, hey, do you guys have a long-range plan or a strategic plan? No one knew what I was talking about, and we eventually dug up a plan that had expired 2 years before, and when I met with the management team, they were like, I didn't even know we were supposed to do, well, we did that. I didn't know, but yeah, we did that. Sure, we did that. And the way that we approach strategic planning, particularly given the budget constraints that we were facing, I used to have a budget of $6.5 million. I have a population of about 85,000 people. It's a single building of about 53,000 square feet. And the building is as big as it's going to get. It's not going to get any bigger than that. But we had, when we did our strategic planning, we hired a strategic planner who lives in my community, so she's totally bought into it. But she has a product development background, and that's what a lot of her strategic planning was about, was how to plant products. And it was a really interesting take for me, because when you approach planning from a product design perspective, which a lot of libraries don't, you actually start thinking about your services as products, and how do you market them, and are you providing something that's actually important. And so we created these user profiles because I have a really diverse community. We have a growing Arab population. We have a very large Asian Indian population. We have a large otherwise Asian population. But it's a community that most of the residents were white. And I have a lot of long-time people who still have their family farms. So it's kind of a suburban-urban sort of an environment. And when we develop these user profiles, we actually put names on people, like stock photos, and put names on them. So Sally is an early Ford retiree. She's African American. She's divorced. She has 2 children who are grown up. One of them is still in college. There are these customer profiles that we developed and did surveys and focus groups with people in the community. So we feel like we have a really good grasp of who lives in our community, what their needs are. And it allows us to think about opportunities and possibilities, and it also allows us to let go of some really heartfelt, like handmade, handcrafted flannel boards and puppets. And is that really a good use of my children's librarian's time when we know we can buy those and they're mass produced and we can get those? So it helped us to focus on what's possible. And I learned from that, these are the people I want working for me. And to see the staff kind of come up to that has been great. And so I'm finding that I am able to empower my staff because they know what the plan is. I don't have to sit there and be like, how do I know that person's going to go to this meeting and represent us well? They know what our plan is. They know what we're trying to achieve. They've been able to let go of the things that are no longer working. And I'm actually able to spend a little bit more time in my building because I'm not going to these meetings anymore. I get to send my staff to those. And then my employees are commenting on the fact that I'm in the building at all, which is great. So that's the thing I would tell you, is to think about possibilities. And my typical day, I try to spend a little bit of time every day just walking around. It's not that big a building. I actually find that I miss driving around to branches from when I worked at Ann Arbor. I'm like, I miss the alone time in the car. Because I walk out and everyone wants to talk to me. And it gets overwhelming after a while, like Sherlanya was saying. But I find that it's important. I know how to reboot our automated sorting system. I know how to issue a library card. I know how to shelve things. I know that if someone asks me, how do I work the printer, I can do that. And it isn't so much like I have to have my hands on everything. It's more that I think my staff need to see that I am doing the work that they do, and they know that I'm not going to ask them to do anything that I myself wouldn't do. As far as the future of libraries and where we're headed, we changed our mission statement as part of our strategic plan. The thing that we heard the most from the people that we did surveys and focus groups with was that they come to the library to see the community. And they all expressed it in different ways. But you could sit at the bench by the front door of my library and see all kinds of people walk through. Young people, old people, all different races and diversities and ethnicities. And you really get a microcosm of our community at our library. And so our mission statement is Canton Public Library connects your community. And it's connect in whatever way that means to you, and it's community in whatever way that means to you. And that kind of underlies everything that we do. How does this make a connection? Your handcrafted flannel board, how does that help make a connection in a way that, a purchased one from Demco or Highsmith or somebody else wouldn't? And what is the value that that's bringing back? And what are the things that people are looking for? And then all the demographic research that we did has enabled us to say, like one of the things we did that we let go of was trying to get a guys' book discussion group going. And, it was like, well, okay, let's try like a thriller. Let's try like Tom Clancy this month. Let's try a Western next month. Like, we got to figure out how we get men to go. Okay, so they don't. And you just got to stop. Like, you get to a point where you're like, we're not doing that anymore. Because the user profile that we had, for that was men, and the research that we had, you're not going to get middle-aged men to come to a book discussion. You're just not. And if you're going to get them to come to a book discussion, you're better off having it be a nonfiction topic on a how-to kind of a book. And at that rate, you may as well have like someone from the hardware store come in and actually show people how to do things. And at that rate, you shouldn't be doing it because I have a Home Depot in my community and they do those there. So then it's like, you just work your way through it and then you're like, well, why are we doing that then? But then on the flip side, we had a program that we thought would be great, was a Busy Moms Book Club, where they could come in and their kids could play nearby with some toys while the ladies, the moms would talk about books and things. And they loved it. They thought it was great, but they'd show up and no one had read the book. They just hadn't. So we ended up tweaking that. You're like, okay, so now it's playtime, and the kids come and play, and the parents get to talk to each other, and it's non-registration, so it's not limited to 10 people or whatever it used to be. And so that's how you adapt to the realities of your particular situation. So I don't want to go on any longer, but I talk all the time about how, I came into this bad situation and I'm this horrible human being that's had to cut all kinds of things. But I really do myself try to think about positives. I don't have $6.5 million anymore, but I have $4.9 million, and there's a lot you can do with $4.9 million. And I think that as you're looking towards the future of what libraries are and what they mean, for me, for my community, and it's going to be different in every community, but in my community, the library is a place where people connect, and our job is to facilitate those connections, whether it's around a video gaming, tournament or a book discussion or just people who need to use computers. I don't have broadband throughout my community. So we're fiber, we're high speed. So I still have people in my community where this is the place where they come and use computers. And if that for them means community and that's how they connect, then I'm going to facilitate that as much as I possibly can. And then my last piece of advice for you guys as students is to do everything that you can now to be as broad-based and as multifunctional as you can be before you leave here. Speaking from public libraries in particular, the majority of libraries in the United States and Canada are single-location libraries in rather small communities. So the chances that you're going to end up in one of those is pretty high if you're thinking about working in a public library. And that's not to say that you can't ever work for an Ann Arbor or a Houston or a San Francisco, but you're going to be that much more valuable if you are as diverse and multifunctional as you can be. Thank you.
Hey guys, so I'm curious because I frequently, and this is in no way an offense to my public librarian colleagues, because I certainly appreciated my public library when I was still back in Cleveland. But I don't really think about public librarianship, because I've been in university libraries. I plan on being in an academic environment when I graduated. I've been in academic libraries for 3.5 years. And so, I know that I have friends who are public librarians, but I don't frequently think about the very different environment that it offers. So I wanted to ask you guys, how many of you are planning when you graduate? How many of you are planning on being public in a public library, or think you'll end up in a public library, or want to be in a public library, not end up being? And how many of you think you're going to be in an academic environment, or perhaps like a company or something else that's not a library altogether? That might be the smartest thing. There's both money and opportunity there. So anyway, the reason I ask that is because, the work that I do is not entirely different, but in many ways very different than I would do if I was in a public library. And I don't know of any public libraries besides really big ones with really big budgets, and those don't exist right now. Would hire someone like me. So I'm the digital preservation librarian here in Michigan, and that is that is, I believe, not very common position that many libraries have anywhere. It was an interesting opportunity for me because I guess, okay, I'm going to go roll back a second here. So am I a forward-thinking librarian? That's for you to decide. I never planned on touching books in school. When I went to school, I knew that I would not go to library school. I had absolutely no inclination to work with patrons or touch books. And so I don't have to do that, and that is great. What I am tasked with is ensuring the near-term use and long-term viability of the library's digital content. And so there's a lot of content to think about. And so I am located within the Preservation and Conservation Department of the library. And what that puts me in a unique position, because I am not allied with any one digital project, digital collection, digital repository, anything with the word digital in front of it at this library. So I get to pick and choose my battles and pick and choose what I'm interested in working on and addressing or worrying about in any particular time. So I work on different projects kind of as a local consultant, I consider myself. So I consult with people who work on these projects more often than I do. So an example of that is we have HathiTrust, the 800-pound gorilla on campus, over 7 million digital volumes in there right now. So, a lot of the content is going into HathiTrust, and partner content of the HathiTrust is going in there as well. And so we have a lot of new content coming in. And so I work with people in the digital library production services, core services, and the HathiTrust project librarian, and then the executive director of HathiTrust, to figure out, okay, stuff's coming in, what do we do with it? How do we make it work with what we have? and how do we plan for this increasingly dynamic array of content. So, and that's just sort of what's one repository, the biggest repository, the thing I work the most frequently on. But I'm not allied with HowDTrust. I'm not even allied with DLPS or Core Services. And so I consult with people like M Publishing. I consult with people like the Bentley Archives. Even though they're officially even separate from the library, we have a symbiotic relationship in a lot of ways, and we help each other out. So there's a lot of stuff going on with digital content coming in and figuring out how do you make sure that it's usable now and also usable in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, who knows how long, because content is changing, technology is changing, and keeping on top of that and keeping contemporary and thinking about use and reuse is essentially what I do. If not, I don't really know how it works. I don't do it actively. There's a lot of emailing. So a typical day for me is like, okay, we have this problem. Let's discuss it in a meeting and then keep discussing it in emails. And so knowing when to pipe up, knowing when to actually kind of say, this is actually what I want, and this is what, okay, so choosing when to care and when not to care, this is an important skill. I'm kind of going before I want to talk about this. There's lots of times you need to choose when to care and when not to care. Because they're, especially in an environment like UM where we have so many people who care and are intelligent, awesome people, you can't always get your way. And so knowing when something is bad enough that you need to be like, okay, I need to steer this the way I want to, and knowing when to say, okay, I trust this person to be a thoughtful, intelligent person, and I'm not the only thoughtful, intelligent person in this environment. So that's an important skill. So a lot of what I do on a typical day is read things, read emails, read new reports that come out by other thoughtful, intelligent people who aren't at UM and are doing things that I probably should be doing maybe in about 5 to 10 years. So, there are people who have been doing this for a little bit longer. They're writing these 80, 90-page reports that you get assigned to read in class, and you kind of like skip to conclusion and executive summary part. That's sometimes what I do because, it's 90 pages and I only have a couple hours. So, and then I'm involved in various internal and external working groups. So I'm the digital preservation librarian. I get assigned to things like, interinstitutional kind of working groups where we talk about big things and try to plan for the future and work on in collaborative ways. And sometimes that works great, and sometimes that works terribly. And so, that's one of those other things where you get to pick and choose how you devote your time. Is this important to the library that I work really hard to work with these people? Or is it kind of like, let's just be involved and make sure nothing's going really terribly? So that's what I do. So is that forward thinking? It might be. It's up for you to decide. And so what I really think forward thinking is to be someone who's interested in taking advantage of the current educational, social, and technological environment. And rather than being concerned with keeping things the same, and so there's a balance. There's this value between consistency and reliability of the processes. So you don't want to keep changing things just because change is happening. You want to look at where you are and what's happening around you, and I think keeping yourself valuable to the public and your clients. So that's kind of what they've been talking about is looking at your users and the changing world around you and making yourself valuable to users, because if you're not valuable to your users in some way, why would they keep paying you? I think that's kind of what my colleagues here have been saying. So I think it's important to embrace new things while respecting established practices and then kind of respecting how things have been done, but then looking to adjust the way you do things based on what people are expecting and how people are interacting with technology and interacting with information. So being able to evaluate things is really important, I think. I think libraries are sometimes, or frequently, or always exceptionally eager to embrace new technologies. So I don't know. So I imagine most of you, no one really goes through undergraduate for library education. So all of you probably have like a couple sets of friends now. Like I know on Facebook, or on Twitter, I have like my undergrad graphic design friends, and I have then like my library school friends, and I have kind of my professional colleague friends now. So how many of you, you could say at least a substantial majority of your friends on, say, Facebook, if you use that, are librarians versus kind of your past life or things like that before? For me, all of my librarian friends are always all over everything. They're tweeting all day, they're on Facebook all day, they're sharing information. And my graphic design friends are like, I just had a baby. and this is totally awesome. Like there's this gap between like what I used to do and the people there, and kind of like librarians love using technology. And sometimes that's terrible because it's like this solution in search of a problem that doesn't exist. So it's like, oh, wikis, okay, like this is like maybe 5 years ago. Like everyone, okay, let's make a wiki. We have this wiki. Sweet. Or let's put a blog on it. Or put a tweet on it. So this is, literally put a bird on it. Okay, so so we have, So I think libraries and librarians love doing this stuff because it's cool. Like there's something there. It's a new opportunity to reach people. So the sentiment is awesome. But then the reality of the execution of this is much more difficult and requires much more planning than you think it does. Because especially when people are getting paid a decent amount of money, it's expensive to plan. And it's expensive to execute something, and it's expensive to execute something that no one uses. And so it's really important to look at the world around you and see what the problems actually are, and then be thoughtful in the execution of the solution. And that can involve technology, but it may not. It might involve just looking at who's coming to your program, and if they're if you have people who, if no one's coming to use it, then tweaking it. That doesn't even involve technology. Having a place for kids to play and people to talk to each other is awesome. So you might not need any kind of tweets or blogs or Facebook posts or anything like that. So in terms of digital preservation, for example, in terms of forward thinking, so digital preservation, my boss realized, she's the head of preservation and conservation, so she realized that a lot of the library's collections, which she is tasked with worrying about, are getting more and more digital. There's more and more digital content coming in. So who is worrying about this? So there, of course, there are thoughtful, intelligent people who are worrying about it, but there's no one that she oversees that's worrying about it. And so if she has to worry about the collections, so the collections are going digital, hire somebody who has to think about it and worry about it. And especially if they can work with these other people who are managing these projects, we all work together and solve problems. So that works great. So where are libraries headed? I was asked to think about where a library is headed. And I think that's really tough to think about because I think it really depends on the institution or the organization at the scale at which they're operating and then their operating budget and also their clients. So the public, while the University of Michigan is a public organization, we do have different clients than the Ann Arbor District Library. And so I think that has also a much larger budget. So we have this desire to stay on the forefront of things. We're always looking at new needs and to investigate how the library can meet those needs, especially and to support research and scholarship here at the university. And so we're looking at things like research data management, how interinstitutional collaborations like Hathi Trust, university publishing, that's a big thing. We absorbed. I don't know if that's the right term. So we allied. Now the university publishing, the university press is now within the library, and the scholarly publishing office is merged with publishing to become M Publishing, and we have an AUL of publishing. So this is a unique position that I think almost no other academic libraries are really have right now. So UM is always moving forward and always looking for new opportunities to see what the library is supposed to be supporting scholarship in general. And I think that that's one direction libraries are headed, is looking for how, in the grand scheme of things, they're supporting scholarship, supporting research. And so I think that, thinking about that, I think that it's easy to think that libraries are at risk by not changing. So, there's a lot of risk by, is Google putting libraries at risk? Is the Google Books project putting libraries at risk? Librarians love to think that everyone is out to get them. And I think that is backwards and sad thinking, because no one's out to get libraries. people are out to get users. And if the library is not getting users, then they're doing something wrong. And so I think that they need to stay agile. I don't think that libraries need to just think about change. I think they need to be aware and agile in the way that they can change and look for opportunities to change. I don't think that technology or Generation Y or Z or whatever is anything like that is putting libraries at risk of irrelevance, but I think that their lack of desire and their active rebelling against new models of communicating and interacting with information is not going to help libraries stay relevant. So I think that that is kind of where I think libraries are going in interesting places if they stay aware and let themselves be dynamic organizations. So what do I think you guys need to know? I think that, first off, I've talked about this in other times I've talked to students, and you might have heard me say something along this, but look, when you're looking at jobs, because you're going to be looking at jobs soon, but look for jobs that give you the opportunities and the challenges that you want. Because different scales of organizations, different organizations altogether, whether it's going to be public or private or, academic, these things are going to offer you very, very different opportunities, even if the jobs sort of sound the same. So when you're applying for things, when you're looking for things, when you're talking to people at these organizations, I think it's important for you to understand what kind of challenges you're going to face. Because the challenges that I face here are entirely different than the challenges I faced at Mason. Because Mason was a much smaller organization. I had very different types of people supporting me and that I interacted with. And so I think that that's important to think about. I think that students don't need to know any particular technologies, any particular tools, anything like that, because this is stuff that you're thoughtful, intelligent people, and you will learn very quickly when something is given to you. I think knowing how to understand things, how to analyze things, how to stay involved in the world around you is much more important than knowing how to use, Oxygen XML editor, or how to use premise metadata. This is stuff that I use every day. But this is something you can learn in like a week. You read the premise data dictionary and you're like, okay, this is what this element does, this is what this element does. And you probably have, if you've taken a digital preservation class, you probably had to do something in premise. And so you did learn it in a week, right? So a job is many, many years long, many, many, many weeks. So knowing individual things, no one really cares. Like when I talk to interns, like when I've interviewed for internships, and when you guys come to me, what I want to get from you guys is, what is your philosophy? And I think that's what you guys learn in library school, is a philosophy that then you apply in your job. And so you're developing a philosophy in your classes. It's very easy to say, like, classes are so theoretical, like this sucks, like I'm not doing anything that's like real world life. It's like, this is not what I'm going to do in my job. And no, it's not what you're going to do in your job. Because if you did that in school, you'd be like, okay, well, I have like 4 days to this meeting on this thing, so I can't really do anything in between then and then. So that would not work in school. So I think what the professors are, I don't know if that made any sense, but what I'm saying is that when you work in an organization, things are very slow, and school can't be that slow. And so what you learn how to do is communicate, you learn how to work in groups, you learn when to pick your battles, you learn who to work with to get stuff done. Like these are the things that you learn on the job. Is who do you need to talk to? Who do you need to be working with? What groups are meeting that you didn't even know were meeting, and then you need to get in on that if you can. Elbow your way in. This is stuff that I figured out in the year and a half I've been here. Is there's a hockey trust like managers meeting that I'm not on, and they decide things there. So I should probably get in on that, I guess, just to see what's being decided or being discussed. Going to conferences, that can be awesome and boring. But what's awesome is you get to travel and get to talk to people and see old friends and get a couple really cool presentations out of it, and then you get a lot of presentations you're like, why did I sit through this? And hopefully when you start giving them is you're not giving the presentations that you're like, why did I sit through that? Because when you present and write papers and stuff like that, it's both, one, good for your CV and good for promotion, especially in the university environment, but two, it makes you really think about what you did when you have to write about it. And so like I'm writing papers, short little papers, like 4 pages, about like, here's this problem, here's how we solved it. Because no one does that. No one writes papers about how they solve problems, and that's the only thing I want to hear about when I go to conferences, is how did you solve this problem? I don't want to hear about your, the theoretical problem or like the problem you're going to be solving, is I want to see exactly how you solved it, because this is like what applies to people like me, is how do we solve problems? So, go to conferences and write papers. And write papers that people want to read, and make presentations that people want to see. And then that's really about it. That's what I think you guys need to know. Don't worry about learning any particular technology. Learn about how to think about technology.
Thanks, Shane. We just have time for a few questions. So, because we're supposed to be out. Oh, that clock is 1 hour slow. Anyway, please.
Well, the question I had is, a lot of you were talking about being multifunctional, and I'm going to say something kind of controversial here and say that when I look at the course sheets for LIS at SI, my reaction is that it tends to be in the old school librarian camp. That a lot of the classes are cataloging and collection development are really strongly recommended ones. And also I've heard from a lot of my fellow LIS concentrators that within SI culture, they feel like they're not very comfortable, that there's this feeling that sort of agrees with what you've been talking about, that we're looking at a future that isn't necessarily about what is happening in the classes right now. So, kind of an awkward question, but I know that all the specializations here at UMich have ALA accreditation. So do you think, because they had this thing called tailored, where you could go through and literally take a bunch of different courses from a bunch of different specializations and end up being extremely multifunctional and extremely, like you could take HI courses and LIS courses, and you would end up without an LIS specialization, but with an ALA accredited degree. Are you saying possibly that this would make more sense in terms of the library profession than go straight LIS right now?
Do you mind? Can I? Okay. I'm going to caveat this. I'm past president of the SI Alumni Society. Okay. I know that more than half of the students currently enrolled at SI are LIS. I know that I don't give a rip what your specialization was when you get out of school. It is a matter of you have the piece of paper in your hand, I have a librarian position, and you tell me what you're going to be able to do for me as far as the job that I need to get done. The school has, and Shane and I were just talking about this before this session, the school here, I think, has done a really good job of being responsive, particularly about the foundations courses, which have changed 3 or 4 times in a major or a minor way over the last 15 years. And they do that on purpose, not to like mess with you, but because they're realizing that the faculty here, I think, do a really good job of being cognizant of what the environment is, to make sure that you're getting the skills that you need, as painful as it is, in those foundations courses, to have that foundation. That's why they call them. I don't even know if they still call them that, but that's what I still call them that. The things that the LIS courses that are labeled that continue that foundation. As far as you need to have an understanding. I can't catalog to save my life, but I know what the important elements are, and I know the things that we have to watch out for. And quite frankly, the cataloging class I did here wasn't really cataloging. So, and they call it something else, organization of information. Yes, yeah. So I know I can organize information. I can't make a MARC record. I just can't. I have people who can do that. And when I say that, I mean I contract with someone who provides me with the records, and then we put them in our catalog. So you should be multifunctional, and don't be afraid to take courses outside of the LIS, and I would argue that you should, and it's a strength of this school in particular that they give you the opportunity to do that you can be narrowly specialized, but they still require you to have a broad base. And so don't be afraid of taking a UX or an HCI or an SC kind of a course just because you think that it's not going to be useful to you. If you are LIS, you said you were? You are, okay. And if you are LIS, I still encourage you to get outside the box and take some of those other classes. Absolutely.
I think, I'm going to continue on this very briefly. I know we don't have much time. So I think that take the classes that give you the opportunity to explore projects that you can talk about in interviews.
And that's where your DFE comes into play also. Don't just do a DFE in LIS if you have an opportunity to do a DFE in something that's somewhere else.
Sorry, BFE.
The directed field experience, or the PEP, the practical engagement.
I'd just like to quickly ask you guys about the HarperCollins new ebook policy. How is it affecting your library? Will it affect, and how is your library going to deal with it?
Those aren't good values, but ebooks aren't good values. I mean, a 26 checkout ebook's not a good value.
Right.
We don't plan to buy them, but we're part of a consortium, so it's kind of a moot thing. It's getting a lot of frisson and press. I think the reality is we're going to be really nostalgic for moves like this in a couple of years. We ain't seen nothing yet. This is the opening strike of a very long, and this is we're going to wish that we could buy 26 checkouts 5 years from now. So, I mean, it's a big frisson, but it's like, this is what happens when you're not at the table. We have no power to negotiate with HarperCollins on this. Overdrive's our intermediary. And it basically comes back down to intermediaries don't help libraries. So you got to make the deals yourself.
This problem scales as well. At the academic level, we have very little power in terms of what we pay for electronic content as well. The library pays the budget for print material versus electronic material. I think electronic has eclipsed print because the subscriptions for electronic journals, for databases, for everything is outrageous. And the does have some say because we're big, but imagine how smaller organizations with lesser budgets have in terms of picking and choosing their electronic content.
Real quick before everyone leaves, Kelly Kawach asked me to point out that a week from today at 11:30 in the Ehrlicher room, they're having On the Road to Kenya, librarians making a difference. And she would love it if you would RSVP and I can.
Also, please come to Library Camp at AADL on May 2nd. It's a free event. It'd be awesome.
There's some questions over
Yeah.
there.
Do you guys have time for
Sure.
questions? No one's out there, so.
Tell them to wait.
It's important.
Go for it.
Okay, well, I'm not quite sure who the guy on the left.
That guy, mover and shaker.
Well, you said at the end of your talk that you thought that ebooks were going to come down to 99 cents.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be antithetical to the current trend, which is that they're actually going up in price to be comparable to print books.
Right.
Because we're seeing an equal value.
Yeah.
So where are you coming from?
Well, no, the publishers are forcing an equal value on them. People who are in control of their price points are making more money at 99 cents than they are at $9.99. And the publishers aren't going to be able to hold on to that forever. The problem is the entire publishing industry is all about making back the advance. It's not a sustainable business model. Amanda Hawking, you may have heard of. She's an author who writes YA novels and things like that. She's a young woman herself. She is selling her books on the Kindle store directly at $9.99, $1.99, and $2.99 and making $1.5 million a year selling directly because she doesn't have a publisher. She gets 70% of the price. Publishing as we now know it, look at the music industry now. The music industry is in the process of collapsing. Most media, when they experience a shift like this, ultimately wind up 2 orders of magnitude smaller than they did. Happened to the record industry, it's happening to the CD industry, happened to the candle industry. So when a technology is replaced, it collapses to 1% of its former self. So we have to think about what a library industry looks like with a publishing business that's 1% of the size that it is now, because that's where it's going to be. And how do we get content to our people in that? Because it's going to be that as soon as James Patterson realizes that he can make more money at 99 cents without a publisher than he's making at $9.99 or $14.99 or $24.99 with a publisher, the bubble is going to pop, and all those companies are going to go out of business in the scope of 5 years. Not 5 years from now, 5 years from the moment that there's the first 99-cent blockbuster.
Yeah, really, I think it takes, we've seen this example by power players in the music industry like Nine Inch Nails, Radiohead.
Right.
They're releasing albums basically themselves, essentially saying, pay what you want or pay this small amount, and, you can get some added in, like, bonuses that aren't just digital music files. And, the publishers and the excuse me. So, the established way of, like, distributing information, as you guys are probably well aware, when it goes, the things are online now, and the former distribution methods are playing really bad catch-up and also fighting way too hard to keep their hand and keep their level of power without adapting to new ways. So think about that as an analog to what libraries are doing. These are real threats. I know I said the library is not necessarily at risk, but they are at risk if they don't look at new ways to adapt their services, which is what the record industry, the film industry is not doing.
Fight it out.
Real quick, I don't know how much you guys are involved in hiring at your particular organizations, but just this is out of my brain, not something that's a holy for a job. And I just wonder, I've got the amount of experience, I'm going to have this master's degree, but what for you guys really stands out on a resume? What makes you look at a person and think, oh, this is someone I want to talk to?
A web project that we can look at and see that it kicks ass. I mean, for me, that's the biggest thing, is that if you can see something that you've done, it's like, holy shit, they did this. Then that's really attractive, especially because it shows vision. Because that's what you're looking for when you're hiring a librarian. Are they coming in with a 15-year-old vision of what libraries should be? Or is their vision ahead of where it's going to be? So I think that, it's like Shane said, projects that you can point to on a resume are what get you in the door. And then once you're in the door, it's showing your passion and your vision.
Yes, you hire people.
I'm not hiring right now.
I mean, the other thing to think about is that, a job opens up, you get 70 applications at a time. You have a finite amount of time to read those 70 applications. So you're really in a position where you're like, okay, no, yes, no, yes, maybe, and so what do you do to represent yourself well? If you're using the tips that you get in career in planning services about, mention the institution, make sure you have your stuff right, because if you don't, that's a really quick no.
And generally speaking, I can agree with that.
You got to ask really good questions about the institution.
You have to show that you did research about the institution, and that you, because it's the resumes. We had one part-time children's librarian position I posted last year because we kind of hit rock bottom as far as the staff that I had and the work that needed to be done. And we got 60 applications for one unbenefited 20-hour-a-week position. Right? So get out of Southeast Michigan, and I hate to say that, but it's true. There's a concentration of 2 really good library schools. There's a huge pool of people. And I'm still hearing that the Southwest and the Southeast are hiring. I don't even know if you're public, so I'm just assuming that. But so what we're looking for, because we've hired together, is the resume, and does it show that you did research about us? Does it say my library name in it, or does it say, as I got one resume, we got one resume before that said, I've always wanted to work at the Chicago Public Library. Great, you should go there, and you put that aside. And I don't want to hear, I've always loved books. I don't want to hear the heartwarming story about your school librarian that turned you on to libraries. Don't want to hear it. Save it for the interview. Tell me in your resume, this is what you're asking for, this is what I provide you. And you can either bullet it out explicitly, or you can just craft your sentences so that you can demonstrate that you've met whatever the requirements are. And if you do have a project I could look at, that would be great.
Yeah, the cover letter is the most important thing. I mean, basically, if you can express both your enthusiasm, your interest, and why you are good for the position in what you are writing, that is the best thing you can do, because that's how you set yourself apart from everybody. Everybody graduating from library school is going to know 90% the same things. The way you set yourself apart is by the experiences that you've had through projects and practical experience, and the way you write about that. So that's what you got to spend your time on.
And it's got to be concise.
Indeed.
Yeah, one-page resume, seriously.
No. I have to
cover letter. I'm talking about cover
respectfully
letters.
disagree.
I want the cover letter to be concise.
The resume, I think, if you have a one-page resume, all it shows me is that you haven't done a lot of stuff.
I don't particularly care about the one-page resume.
No, the one-page resume, that's like what I learned as a graphic design student. It's like, oh, it needs to be one page if this is a graphic design thing. And then after I was like, no, it doesn't.
We'll figure out if you padded it though.
Yeah,
we'll figure that out.
Well, you need to think about, you're not home free once you get the interview. Sometimes it's like you see this letter and you see this cup and you're like, this is going to be great, and you're really excited, and you go to shake the hands of the person and they do not look you in the face. And you're like, well, I am suddenly 50% as excited as I was for this one.
Especially for public-facing positions, you have to be able to make eye contact. You have to have a certain level of sociability.
I mean, even in the kind of positions that Eli's talking about, like if you're going to send somebody out to go to try to interview somebody to get this new content, they have to be able to look at people. They have to be able to take an idea, boil it down to a couple sentences, and
they can't be
interpret
mumblecore.
what the person's
They can't
saying.
be like,
Exactly.
like you have to actually talk out loud.
There's also kind
It's
of
true.
the thing that, like what Eli said about, saying that you love books is basically like a good way to not get hired. Like, I'm surprised at how quickly I've become like jaded and like hate when interns or anyone says this. Is like, oh, I want to get into digital. If you're in digital stuff, here's a digital comparison of this. Is I want to be able to provide free access to all this information that was formerly like not able to be seen. It's like, yeah, that's why we all want to do this. Like this does not set you apart. Like that's like the equivalent of I love books. Is I love information being available on the web for free for everybody. Yes, we're all information hippies. We went to libraries. So don't say that, please.
I also tend to look for people who have retail experience or food service experience. If you have worked in food service, you know what I'm talking about. Like if you're going to work in a public library, particularly busy public libraries, and I'm nowhere near as busy as Ann Arbor is, but I'm still really busy given the size of my community. We get 2,000 people a day who come into our building. So you can't, I need to know, and it is really easy to see it in your resume. If you worked at, Macy's or Target, or if you worked at a Bob Evans, you know what a breakfast rush is. You know how to multitask. I look for those things.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you.